Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Sapient Thoughts. Today we're going to be covering an interesting topic about New Atheism. Now, New Atheism as a movement through its various figureheads, it's trying to propagate this idea that science does away with God, and one of the weapons it actually uses is contemporary evolutionary theory. Now, if you pick up a popular book like The God Delusion, and the central argument in The God Delusion is what? It's essentially based on Darwinism, that Darwinism does away with design and therefore does away with the probability of God's existence. However, there's an interesting question that we should ask. Would Darwin have agreed with the God Delusion? Would Darwin have agreed that Darwinism does away with God? Would he have agreed with this atheistic understanding of his theory? Well, firstly, let's unpack what the new atheists have been trying to push. And their narrative has been very simple. Their narrative has been science is discovering truth about the world, and as it's discovering truth about the world, our understanding is being enhanced, and we therefore have less reasons to actually believe in God. And Darwinian evolution is incompatible with the belief in a creator. These are mutually exclusive. However, did Darwin actually believe this? He didn't at all. He, in fact, thought it was absurd that someone could think that you couldn't believe in his theory and believe in God. In fact, when he's published his book, The Origin of Species, someone wrote a review of that book in which that person mentioned that whether God created all of the species together, or God created all of the species independently rather, or God created one particular organism which evolved into the tree of life and all the various different organisms, this would be equivalent. It wouldn't take away from God's sort of greatness. Darwin was so impressed by those words, he actually put them in his second edition of The Origin of Species. There's a book written by Nick Spencer, Darwin and God, in which he actually challenges this narrative that Darwin was writing atheistically, that Darwin actually believed his theory was incompatible with God. And interestingly, what we find about Darwin is that when Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859, a year prior, when he published this with the Royal Society and even his later works, he was a deist. He believed in God. And in the last decade of his life, he became an agnostic because of the problem of evil and suffering. Yet, even in the last couple of weeks of his life, when there was an author who wrote a book, and that book was to do with science and God, Darwin contacted that author and started conversing with them, because he was still interested in the question of God, and he did not treat it in the same way that Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, Krauss, and these types of people try and just brush it away as, oh yeah, that's already dealt with. Darwinism shows that there's no God. In fact, Darwin thought the question of God was important, and he had these questions about free will, about predestination, about suffering. So this new atheist narrative would have been alien to him. So it's not just a case of science against God and Darwinism against God and all of the biological community on one end and theists on the other. Rather, this binary narrative, this false dichotomy that the new atheists try and push, is a grand delusion.